All right, kiddos, I want to give you a sense right up front here of where we're going with this chapter. We're going to start with this basic setup right here, this bedroom scene. And thus far, it's unrendered, it's unlit, so you can get a sense of the ginormous difference that lighting makes in a 3D scene inside of Photoshop, as elsewhere, in the real world as well. And this scene was assembled for me by a member of our awesome graphics team here at lynda.com. Custom scene that Paul Roper put together for us inside of Maya. And we're going to take this scene and we're going to go ahead and light it and render it. And we'll ultimately come up with this. So it's a fair sea change, I think. Now, I rendered this version of the image using Photoshop's Ray Trace draft setting. And as a result, we have these very dark, even blackish shadows. And so you can see that. And as a result, we have these very dark, sometimes black shadows. And for example, this little bit of baseboard in the upper right region of the image is entirely black. Whereas when I rendered the scene using Photoshop's Ray Trace Final setting, I ended up with this version of the scene here. So much brighter. Also, we have filled in shadows. So we have these orange shadows that are created by the light bouncing off the floor and then filling in the shadows. So we have a much more realistic version of the scene. Brighter, more cheerful as well, and so forth. I went ahead and filled in the windows. Those are 2D effects, by the way. So that has nothing to do with the ray tracing, because the ray trace draft version of the image, you can see we don't have any reflections in the windows. We do in this final version. Again, totally 2D fakery. I'll show you how that works before we're done. Anyway, for now, what I'd like you to do, if you're working along with me, is switch over to Photoshop. I was in the bridge, by the way, there for a moment. And I have opened this file that's called basecomp.psd. It's found inside the 15 lighting folder. And it contains a background layer and then just one more layer. This moonlit sky, which comes to us from a fellow named Stas Parov of the Fotolia image library, about which you can learn more at fotolia.com/geek. And the only reason we've got this image in here is to fill in that initial window. So we'll come back to it later. Go ahead and turn it off for now. And then I'd like you to go up to the 3D menu and choose New Layer from 3D File. Then navigate your way to this subfolder that's inside the 15 lighting folder. It's called Roper Resources. That is these files from Paul Roper. And I want you to select the file that's called hotelroom.obj and then click Open in order to import this 3D scene into Photoshop. Now, it not only contains the scene ultimately rendered out as a single big mesh, but it contains a ton of materials as well that will give us the option to better manipulate the scene over time. All right, I'm going to go ahead and grab my 3D camera tool here. And I'm going to use the widget to zoom in on the scene. So I'm dragging on that blue arrow in order to move inward. And then I'll also drag down on the green arrow to move our view of the scene down just a little bit. And I might go ahead and rotate it up just like so that we can see down into the scene. I'm going to scoot this over as well. Because one of the things that we need to do here is figure out where all the various objects are. So if I double click on the thumbnail for this hotel room layer here inside the layers panel to bring up my 3D panel, you can see that I've just got one mesh. That's it. And if you go up to the little filter by meshes icon and click on it, sure enough, one mesh is all you got. Which means that we can't move any of the meshes around, so we can't change the position of the windows, we can't move the bed inside the scene, we can't do any of that jazz. And that has a lot to do with the fact that we imported this scene as an OBJ file, which Photoshop doesn't like nearly as much as DAE files. But that's okay, because we can still work with it. Where we're going to have the option of manipulating the scene is in terms of its materials. So if I switch back over to Filter by Whole Scene, then I can see this big long list of materials here. Some of them make a modicum of sense, like there's 4 window materials, so I assume those go with the windows. But the other ones, all these Lamberts, and then there's some lamps and beds, and I don't know what's going on with all this stuff. And so I'd like to figure out which material goes with which object. For example, since the only control I have over the bedspread is going to be a material, I would like to know which material that is. I can't turn materials on and off. Notice they have eyeballs, but the eyeballs are dimmed. So I ask you, why are they even there if they're perpetually dimmed? If we have no option to click on them, why does Photoshop tempt us with them? Here's the tip, though. If we click on one of these items, like this thing that's called bedside table, I assume it's the bedside table right here, but let's confirm by going down to the opacity value. And if I set that opacity value to 0, like so, and then press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac, sure enough, the table disappears. So that tells me that indeed This material goes with that table. So that's great. That's good news. Also, another way to sort of figure out what's going on is to go down to this little eye icon down here next to the little grid that says Toggle MISC 3D Extras. Click on it and then choose 3D Selection. And that way you're going to see a little wireframe around the selected item. Okay, so we know it's the bedside table. Instead of this weird long name it has right now, let's just go ahead and call it bedside table, like so. And so that way we know what in the world it is. Now I'm going to crank the opacity value back up to 100%. Okay, so we figured out one of the many objects inside of the scene. In the next exercise, we're going to organize and name all of the others.